This is a story about how the most beautiful connections often grow in the most unexpected places between people who have forgotten how to speak the language of the heart. He was a man known only as the gardener of the city's oldest cemetery. A former linguistics professor named Arthur, he had lost his wife to a long illness 2 years prior, and with her, his love for words. He had retreated from the academic world where he once taught poetry and the beauty of language, now finding solace only in the silent, steady growth of nature. To the few people who knew him, he was just the quiet caretaker who spoke more to roses and oak trees than to humans. He believed his own story had reached its final chapter, that the most meaningful words of his life had already been spoken and were now etched on a headstone. She was a brilliant violinist named Clara, who had lost her hearing in a sudden accident 6 months ago, her world collapsing into unbearable silence. The music that had once been her soul's voice, that had taken her to concert halls across Europe, was now gone. She came to the cemetery daily, not to visit anyone specific, but because it was the only place where her silence didn't feel out of place, where it blended with the quiet of the place. She would sit by an anonymous old monument of a weeping angel, feeling the faint vibrations of the city through the cold stone, imagining it was the echo of music she could no longer hear. Their first encounter was without words, as most of their interactions would be. Arthur noticed the elegant young woman who came every day like clockwork, always sitting in the same spot, her hands resting on the stone as if listening for something. There was a profound sadness in her posture that mirrored his own. One morning, he began leaving a single flower near her spot, a crimson rose one day, a sprig of lavender the next, a camellia the day after. It was his way of speaking when words failed, a silent greeting from one broken soul to another. After a week of these floral gifts, Clara started bringing her violin case. Though she could no longer hear the notes, she could feel the vibrations through the wood, through her fingers, through the ground beneath her feet. She would play the pieces she knew by heart, Bach's Chaconne, Beethoven's Spring Sonata, her eyes closed, tears streaming down her face, creating beautiful music that only the birds, the wind, and apparently the quiet gardener could appreciate. One afternoon, as she played a particularly moving passage from Schubert's Ave Maria, Arthur approached slowly, his work boots making no sound on the soft grass. He didn't speak. Instead, he knelt beside her and gently placed his hand on the violin's body, feeling its vibrations. Then he took her hand and placed it over his own heart, letting her feel its rhythm. In that moment, without a single word spoken, they understood each other perfectly. She felt the steady beat of his heart, and he felt the vibration of her music. Two different languages speaking the same emotional truth. They developed their own silent language over the following weeks. He would show her different plants and their meanings: roses for beauty and courage, oak for strength and endurance, ivy for connection and fidelity. She would play different melodies to express what she couldn't say, swift and passionate when she was thinking of her past life, soft and melancholic when she missed the sound of rain, lively and playful when she felt a rare moment of joy. He learned to read the music in her expressions and the way she moved. She learned to read the poetry in his gardens and the flowers he chose. The turning point in their quiet relationship came when the city announced plans to develop part of the cemetery into a parking lot. The section with her favorite monument, the Weeping Angel, was scheduled to be the first to go. Arthur launched a silent campaign to save their sanctuary. Using his extensive knowledge of plants and landscape design, he created living sculptures throughout the threatened section, intricate patterns of flowers that spelled "Save this place" when viewed from the nearby church tower, winding herbs that formed a giant heart around the perimeter, and rose bushes planted in the shape of musical notes. It was a protest written in petals and leaves. Clara, inspired by his quiet determination, organized what she called a vibration concert. She reached out to both deaf and hearing musicians, and they arranged a performance where the music would be felt through the ground rather than primarily heard through the air. Musicians played on specially designed platforms that amplified vibrations, and attendees were encouraged to remove their shoes to feel the music through the earth. The media discovered their story: the silent gardener and the deaf violinist, two people who had found solace and connection in a threatened space, now fighting to preserve it. Newspapers wrote about the language of flowers and music. Television stations featured their unique protest, and the public was deeply moved. On the day of the city council vote, hundreds of people came to the cemetery, many bringing their own flowers and instruments, each person with their own story of loss and healing tied to that sacred ground. They won. The city council not only preserved the cemetery, but designated it as a historical green space, with Arthur appointed as its head gardener and Clara offered a position to run music therapy sessions for others dealing with hearing loss. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and purple, they stood together in the saved garden. Clara played her violin while Arthur planted a new flower bed around her: lilies for renewal, forget-me-nots for lasting connection, and daisies for loyal love. The music she couldn't hear vibrated through the soil, and something miraculous happened. The seeds he had planted seemed to sprout faster, as if responding to the vibrations. And in that moment, surrounded by the ghosts of stories past and the promise of new beginnings, they both understood that they had not just saved a place, they had saved each other. Arthur took her hand and placed it on a newly planted sapling, then placed his hand over hers. They stood like that for a long time, two people who had lost their voices to the world, but had found a way to make their hearts sing together. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with the most beautiful music either had ever known, a symphony of growing things and healing hearts. In the years that followed, the cemetery became known as the Garden of Second Chances, a place where people came to find peace and healing. Arthur and Clara continued to develop their silent language, eventually marrying in the very spot where they'd first truly connected, surrounded by the flowers and music that had brought them together. They proved that you don't need words to have a conversation, nor hearing to listen. The most important things are always felt, not heard. And love, like the most resilient flower, will always find a way to grow through the cracks in a broken heart, creating something even more beautiful than what was there before.